There is a formula that mining companies in the late 19th century applied to disasters involving large numbers of men: document the dead, settle with the families, close the site, move the equipment, let the mountain absorb the memory. It worked with remarkable consistency across the coal fields of Pennsylvania, the copper ranges of Michigan, the limestone quarries of Virginia. It worked because the men who went into the ground were, in the accounting of the companies that sent them, replaceable. And it worked because the terrain itself was a collaborator. Deep rock and dark water and the weight of 1,000 feet of mountain overhead do not give up what they take. In the autumn of 1891, a coal extraction company operating in McDowell County, West Virginia, sent 27 men into a cave system connected to a lateral seam they had been working for 11 months. 4 of those men came out. The company's official account of what happened underground that day was filed with the West Virginia State Mining Inspector's office in Welch in November of 1891. It is 13 pages long, it is precise, professional, and almost entirely untrue. The true account is assembled from 3 sources: the testimony of the 4 survivors given in a civil proceeding brought by miners' families in 1893, the private field notes of the state inspector who investigated the site, and a sworn statement given in 1907 by one of the surviving 4, a man named Caleb Mounts, to a Methodist minister who recorded it by hand and preserved it among his church papers. Those papers were donated to the Appalachian Regional Archives at the University of Kentucky in 1968. Drop your location in the comments before we go any further, because what those 23 men encountered in the dark underneath McDowell County is not something that any account, official or otherwise, has ever satisfactorily explained. McDowell County, West Virginia in 1891 was coal country in the most fundamental sense of the phrase. The southern coal fields had been opening at speed since the Norfolk and Western Railway reached the county in 1883, and the operators who followed the rail line into the mountains had little patience for delay and less for caution. Safety regulation in West Virginia mining at this period was nominal on paper and non-existent in practice. The state employed 3 mine inspectors to cover an area that contained hundreds of active operations. Inspections were infrequent, violations were common. The men who went underground understood the terms of the arrangement. They went anyway because the alternative was hunger. The cave system in question was located approximately 3 miles northeast of the settlement of Keystone, on a ridge property that the Harmon-Dacey Coal Company had been leasing since 1889. The first hard frost of that October had come early, biting deep into the ridge lines and freezing the drainage streams at their banks before the second week of the month had passed. Who assembled at the drift mine entrance on the morning of October 9th did so in cold that had already hardened the ground and settled the fog low in the hollow below them. The company had opened a conventional drift mine into the ridge the following year, following a coal seam of moderate quality. In the summer of 1891, a blasting operation on the mine's eastern lateral had broken through into a natural cave, a limestone void of unknown dimensions that ran at a depth of approximately 200 feet below the ridge surface. The company geologist, a man named Frederick Hale, assessed the cave in July of 1891 and reported to company management that it appeared navigable and that the coal seam continued through its eastern wall. His report recommended a survey expedition before any extraction work proceeded. Harmon-Dacey management did not commission a survey expedition. They commissioned a work party. The 27 men who entered the cave on the morning of October 9, 1891, were not explorers and were not equipped as explorers. They were miners, experienced men, most of them with years of underground work behind them. But cave work is different from mine work in ways that matter enormously. A mine is a human-made environment. Its geometry is known, its hazards are, to a significant degree, anticipated and prepared for. A natural cave is none of those things. It goes where limestone and water decided to take it over thousands of years. It has its own atmosphere, its own acoustics, its own relationship with light and the absence of light. The 27 men who went in that morning were carrying the equipment of miners into an environment that miners had no framework for. They were carrying oil lamps. They were carrying tools for cutting coal. They were not carrying rope in sufficient quantity or climbing equipment or anything that would help a man navigate a passage that dropped without warning. The company's official account states that the men entered the cave in good order, proceeded approximately 400 feet along the cave's primary passage, and encountered a structural collapse, a ceiling fall that killed 22 of them, and from which the remaining 5, reduced to 4 when one died at the cave entrance from his injuries, managed to extract themselves. The report describes the collapse as unforeseeable, consistent with natural cave instability, and resulting from no failure of company preparation or judgment. The state inspector's official findings, filed 2 weeks later, concurred with this account. That is what the official record says. The civil proceeding of 1893 produced a different account. The four surviving men, Caleb Mounts, age 31, Thomas Farrell, age 44, Adolphus Goad, age 28, and a man recorded in the proceeding only as W. Bledsoe, age unknown, gave testimony over 4 days in the McDowell County Circuit Court. They were represented by an attorney from Bluefield named Harris Stratton, who had taken the case on behalf of 11 families seeking compensation from Harmon Dacey. The company's defense was that the collapse was a natural event for which the company bore no legal responsibility. Stratton's strategy was to establish, through the survivors' testimony, that the men had been sent into conditions the company had reason to know were dangerous and had been given no adequate means to respond when those conditions became lethal. The testimony established what the official report had not, that the cave system extended far beyond the 400 feet described in the official account, that the primary passage dropped sharply approximately 200 feet in, descending into a lower chamber that the company's July assessment had either not reached or had not disclosed, that the air in the lower chamber was different from the air in the upper passage, thinner according to Mounts, with a quality he described as tasting of deep water and old stone, that the lamps began behaving badly in the lower chamber, flickering and dimming in a manner inconsistent with simple fuel depletion, that the foreman, a man named Darius Coe, who did not survive, had ordered the party to continue descending into the lower chamber despite the condition of the lamps, because the eastern wall coal seam was visible on the far side of the chamber, and Coe was under instruction from the company to assess its extractability. It was in the lower chamber that the men began to hear the sound. All four survivors described it independently, in testimony given on separate days, without opportunity to align their accounts. All four described it the same way, a low, irregular sound from the cave walls and floor, not a crack, not the groan of settling rock, but something that Farrell, the oldest of the four, described as the sound of a place that knew it was being entered. Mount said it was the first sound he had ever heard that he could not assign a cause to, and he had worked underground for 9 years. Goad, who was the most technical in his account, said it appeared to originate from multiple points in the chamber simultaneously, which he noted was physically inconsistent with any single structural source. Bledsoe did not describe the sound in detail. He said only that when he heard it, every instinct he had developed in years of underground work told him to go back the way he had come, and that the fact that Coe ordered them forward was the decision that killed 23 men. What happened next in the lower chamber is where the four accounts begin to diverge slightly in detail while remaining consistent in sequence. The lamps went out, not gradually, but within a period of seconds, as though something in the air had changed decisively. In the complete darkness, the sound from the walls intensified. Men began moving, not all in the same direction. The chamber was large enough, the darkness complete enough, that the party, which had been proceeding as a loose group, fragmented. Mounts described trying to find the men nearest him by voice and finding that voices were behaving strangely in the chamber, seeming to come from wrong directions, seeming to be closer or further than they should have been. Farrell described the same phenomenon. The cave's acoustics in the lower chamber, both men agreed, were not consistent with the acoustics of any underground space they had worked in before. Then came the falls, not one structural collapse as the official account described, multiple. Farrell testified that he felt the floor shudder once, heard a sound he described as the mountain taking a breath inward, and then heard, from different points in the darkness around him, the sounds of men going down, not all at once, in sequence, at intervals, as though whatever was happening to the cave in sections, progressively moving through it from one end toward the other. Mounts corroborated this. He said the sequence of sounds lasted approximately 3 minutes. He reaches in complete underground darkness with those sounds around. Him was not a duration of time he was able to describe accurately to people who had not experienced it. The four men who reached the cave entrance did so by following the feel of moving air, a faint current that Mounts identified as flowing toward the entrance passage. He had worked enough underground to know that air moves toward openings, and he used this to navigate in the dark. He told the others what he was doing, and they followed. They did not stop to search for survivors. Mounts was asked directly in cross-examination why they had not stopped to search. He said, "Because the sounds had not stopped, and I understood, in the way you understand things in the dark, when your body knows more than your mind does, that whatever was happening in that chamber was not finished." The civil proceeding ended in a partial settlement in late 1893. Harmon Dacey paid compensation to 7 of the 11 families. The terms were sealed. The company closed the McDowell County operation in 1894, citing the site's unprofitability. The official reason given in their corporate filings, preserved in the West Virginia Secretary of State's records, was geological instability making further extraction economically unviable. The state inspector who had originally concurred with the company's account of a single ceiling collapse, a man named Porter Duff, who had held the inspector position for 6 years, resigned from the state mining office in January of 1892. His field notes from the site investigation, written in a small bound notebook, surfaced in a Welch estate sale in 1947 and were purchased by a private collector who donated them to the West Virginia State Archives in 1981. The notes are the most candid document connected to this case. Duff wrote them for himself, not for any official purpose, and they read accordingly. In his entry for the site visit conducted on October 14, 1891, 5 days after the event, Duff recorded that he had entered the cave's primary passage to a depth of approximately 150 feet, which was as far as he was prepared to go alone. He recorded that the official company account of a ceiling collapse at 400 feet was inconsistent with the physical evidence he observed. No significant debris field in the primary passage, no fresh fracture patterns on the walls consistent with a major structural event. He recorded that the passage descended more steeply than the company's July assessment had described, and that the air at 150 feet had a character he found difficult to name. Heavy, he wrote in Aware, which he acknowledged was not a technical observation. He recorded that he heard, at 150 feet, a sound from the lower passage that caused him to leave the cave at a pace he described as faster than professional dignity warranted. He recorded his conclusion in 3 sentences at the bottom of the entry. I will file a report consistent with the company's account. The alternative is to file a report that will not be believed and will end my employment. Whatever is in that cave has been there longer than the coal seam. It will remain longer than the company. Caleb Mounts lived until 1931. The statement he gave to the Methodist minister in 1907, 16 years after the event, is the most complete account any of the 4 survivors ever gave. He described the lower chamber in detail. He had not provided in the 1893 testimony its size, which he estimated as larger than any natural underground space he had encountered before or since. The quality of the darkness, which he described as having a density to it that went beyond the absence of light, and the sound, which he said he had heard every night in some form since October 9, 1891, and which he had come to understand not as a geological phenomenon, but as something that had been in that limestone for longer than human memory, reached and that had been disturbed by 27 men with oil lamps and coal tools who had no business going where they went. He said he did not blame the company less for sending them. He said he blamed them fully, and that their settling with 7 families while 3 received nothing was a moral accounting he expected God to correct in time. But he said that what killed 23 men in that chamber was not the company's negligence alone. He said the cave had a claim on that space that the men had entered without understanding. He said the 4 who came out had come out because of luck and moving air and 9 years of underground instinct, and not for any other reason. He said he had not been underground since. He said he would not go underground again. He said he would be buried in a hillside cemetery in full daylight, and that was the closest to the earth you're intended to get. Today, the entrance to the cave system on the McDowell County Ridge is not accessible. The Harmon-Dacey drift mine was sealed in 1894 when the company withdrew. The seal, concrete, reinforced with timber framing, was inspected in 1931 as part of a state survey of abandoned mine sites and found to be intact. The survey notes describe the sealed entrance without comment. They record the site as inactive, permanently closed, no further action required. No one has been in that cave since October 9, 1891, not officially, not on record. The lower chamber where 23 men died has never been reached again. Whatever they encountered in the dark down there, whether it was geological instability the company had concealed, or something in the air, or something in the stone that Porter Duff could not name, and Caleb Mounts spent 40 years trying to describe, remains where it was, in the limestone, in the dark, below a ridge in McDowell County that no trail crosses and no map marks with anything worth visiting. The sound that 4 men described identically independently on separate days of testimony in 1893 has no official explanation. The state of West Virginia never reopened the inquiry. The families who settled took their money and their silence. The families who did not settle received nothing and were never given a reason. 23 men are in that mountain. They have been there for 130 years. No one has gone to bring them out, and no one will. What do you do with a case like this? The company was negligent. That much is beyond dispute. They sent men into conditions they had reason to know were dangerous and covered it with a false report and a sealed settlement. That is the human evil in this story, and it is real and it is documented, and it deserves to be said plainly. But the negligence does not explain what 4 survivors described in that lower chamber. It does not explain Porter Duff leaving at a pace that exceeded professional dignity. It does not explain 40 years of a sound Caleb Mounts heard every night until he died. Was this a company cover-up that became something larger than a company cover-up? Or is there something in certain deep limestone systems, old enough, dark enough, far enough below the surface of a world built for human habitation, that simply does not want to be entered? Drop that in the comments. The divide between those two positions is exactly where this case lives, and I want to know which side you are on. If these are the stories that stay with you, the ones buried under official language and sealed settlements and the weight of a mountain, subscribe and ring the bell. We are not finished. The coal fields have more to say. Some mountains keep their dead, and some of the dead are better kept.